Justin, thank you for taking a minute out for the show today.
Thanks. It's great to be here, Joe.
So, what an interesting life you lead. And before we get into, you know, building the fantasy worlds and everything that goes into your day job, I want to know one of the biggest things that seemed like a fantasy but was real was surviving the COVID pandemic. So, ultimately, how did you get through it? And did it influence the way that you do things now?
God, that's a really good question. So, how did I get through it? My daughter, in
Yeah.
short. So, my now ex-wife, but at the time, of course, my wife, we had our little girl in September of 2018.
Okay.
So, by the time you get to, late winter, early spring of 2020, right? She's about a year and a half old, something like that. And I have as a parent, I've just become increasingly convinced of the importance for a child to have at least one parent. I mean, hopefully both parents, is just available as much as possible, right? I mean, it's just it. I just think it makes such a difference with their attachment and all those various things. I mean, again, there's a lot of great research out on that. All that to say, and so I'm a teacher, and so my classes went online almost immediately.
Yeah.
It is not a great way to teach. I would not want to go back to it for $1 million. But for me, the real advantage was I got to spend a lot of time with my daughter, and I'm somewhat it almost I'm not ashamed, but for a lot of people, COVID was like you said, it was like surviving a dystopian. God forbid if you lost someone, if someone got real sick, right? Some people they lost their businesses, like it was life shattering for so many people. I'll tell you, Joe, I consider myself one of the lucky ones,
Yeah.
and that it wasn't this sort of hit the restart button on my whole life and career. And again, because of the timing, when my daughter being so young, kind of another way to forecast it, I got some of the best paid paternity leave that has maybe ever been.
Yeah.
Right. So that's how I got through it. And like everyone else, I think we had our bumps, along the road. I'll refrain from making any divorce jokes about COVID because that also happened a lot. But sometimes you got to laugh to keep from crying.
Yeah, that's for
But
sure.
but yeah, it's one day at a time, right?
Yeah, it is for sure. So you're a storyteller, you're a master of the Greek and Latin worlds, but I'm gonna boil down what you do to this. I'm gonna put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids at career day, let's say third graders, and one of the kids in the back of the room is curious, and he's like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer him?
What I do is I teach universal truths through the medium of lies. And you're saying, well, what 3-year-old is going to understand that? I tell stories that teach you things.
So, yeah, no,
Yeah,
no,
stories that you, again, probably every third grader can relate to the Avengers, right? To Marvel
yeah,
superheroes, to Superman,
yeah,
right? Superman is a phenomenal analogy because it's a fictional character,
yeah,
right? Everyone knows he's not real. And yet, something as basic as if you tell a Superman story and he decides to, say, kill General Zod,
yeah,
people will come unglued because in a lot of ways people sort of view Superman as almost this stand-in for an omnipotent, omnipresent God character
yeah,
in a way, right? It's like, oh, well, why does Superman have to kill Zod? Isn't he Superman? Can't he find another way, right? I mean, shouldn't Superman shoulda, coulda, woulda done better? All that to say is, once you get to the woulda, shoulda, couldas, you're starting to derive morality from this fictional story, real world morality. Okay, so if that's how you feel about Superman, if you're going to get really upset about Superman killing General Zod, and again, if you know the stories, who's basically an evil Superman, right? He has all the same powers. He's also from Krypton.
yeah,
Then you're probably also the kind of person that's going to get really upset about people in high positions of authority abusing their power, right? And that's probably going to strike a nerve with you a little bit harder than if you're the person that says, well, hey, look, Superman's, he's doing the best he can, right? I mean, not even Superman can save everyone, right? That probably affects how you see other sort of real world cultural slash political things. And to me, it's really about figuring out where your values are.
yeah.
And then the really hard part, I think, is being consistent with those values because myself included, so many of us on for one thing, it's okay, is the evidence So this could have happened, and for something else, it's okay. It's the evidence must be so convincing that it must have happened, and that's a really big gap. And I think it's really best to pick one, probably the higher degree of evidence, and just carry that out throughout your life. So yeah, values, the application thereof, and into that goes a lot of critical thinking. Again, when you're telling stories, when you're telling these Greek mythological stories about Hercules or Achilles, I have one class where we talk about Achilles and we compare his story to that of Jesus. And you're really forced to decide, okay, what's the right thing to do for someone like Achilles in that situation? What would I have done? And I think that's where it really can be life changing.
And it's such a bedrock of our storytelling. All these names that you've already put out here are just foundational, and how we've passed along stories for
Right.
centuries as humans. So I got to know, when you were in that position in the third grade and you had a guest speaker come in, what were you dreaming about becoming later on in life?
Oh wow. Well, I think my first I this is kind of a funny story. And maybe this speaks to the imagination being able to create fantasy worlds. But when I was my littlest ambition as a kid was to be a panther.
Okay.
I just was convinced that human beings could apply for the job of being transformed into animals, and I would be a panther, and I would live in the jungle for free room and board. That's part of the perk of the job. And I would scare people, is what I would do, because people need to be scared. Of course, it's a dirty job, but someone's got to do it.
Yeah.
So that was my earliest ambition. Then I wanted to be a firefighter. I think a lot of little boys go through this phase. They want to be a policeman or a firefighter. For me, it was
Yeah.
fire. And then I became a big pro wrestling fan,
Yeah.
kind of in, teen years. So I got on the back end of when people like the Ultimate Warrior, if that name rings any bells,
Oh yeah.
was really big. And then I sort of jumped off the train kind of right after the Rock Stone Cold Attitude Era. People tell me all the time, you left too early. It's like you missed all the
Yeah.
really funny. But I wanted to be a pro wrestler,
Yeah.
had my name picked out, everything,
Yeah.
right? And then when I got into college, I joined the military. I was 4 years active duty in the Air Force. Then I did I'm sorry, 3 years active duty, another 4 years reserve. And for a while, I was thinking about making the military my career, but I really kind of got a mismatch in respect to my personality versus my job.
Yeah.
I was an aircraft maintenance officer. And and again, I met so many like wonderful people, and there were aspects of the job that I was very good at, namely the people aspects. My problem, Joe, is I'm one of those guys that I really need to watch 3 YouTube videos to change a doorknob.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of a stereotype, but it's like the practical, like nuts and bolts mechanical elements I struggle with,
Yeah.
no matter how simple. And again, these guys are fixing jets.
Yeah.
So I just probably wasn't the best choice to manage the guys fixing the jets, so to speak, right? But so after I got out of the military, I got a hold of a book, and this is really what set me down this life trajectory. And I should backtrack a little bit. I read this book before when I was still an undergraduate, before I joined the military. But it was a book called Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield. I recommend it to this day to anybody. It is the most influential book in my life. Talk about story, like it shows the power of story, how it can absolutely transform a person's life. It's a fictional retelling of the Battle of Thermopylae. If you've ever seen the film 300, the battle between the Greeks, the 300 Spartans, and the Persian army
Yeah.
with the Persian invasion, it's about that battle. It's the same story. But and again, if you've seen 300, it's very sort of fantastical, almost comes across like a comic book movie
Yeah.
because it's based off a graphic novel. It's based off the history. This book reads more like Braveheart, right? So it's like the Braveheart, very factual historical retelling of the battle.
Yeah.
I can just tell you, Joe, I read that book and I just fell in love with the Spartans.
Yeah.
And that led me to falling in love with all the Greeks and then the Romans. I started reading ancient Greek histories for fun at that point. Someone said, hey, if you're doing that, you probably belong in grad school somewhere. I got in grad school, and lo and behold, here I am. I've been teaching Greek and or Latin for 11 years at this point.
Wow.
So absolutely changed my life. And again, I go back to that book when my mother passed away. I read that book.
Yeah.
When I went through my divorce, I read that book. Anytime I've read it 5 or 6 times. Anytime there's been some great challenge, when I was living abroad in Ecuador for a year as an expat, I read that book. Right. I mean, anytime I was going through anything unsettling or challenging or difficult. I've just found that story is a source of so much strength. And that's the kind of thing that I hope my stories now, whether they're the historical slash mythological stories I'm telling in the classroom or the completely fantastical stories that I'm telling in my own books, I hope I can be that for someone else.
So it's interesting when you go into teaching, you're wanting to impart all this knowledge on the students. But in this 11-year tenure of doing what you're doing, what have you ultimately learned about yourself? What have you unexpectedly understood about yourself that you didn't realize before you went into teaching?
That's a very good question. I I think I've learned how arrogant I was when I was young and how much I don't know.
Yeah.
And I guess that's somewhat a short and sweet answer, but I think if you're honestly engaging with the world, just the older you get, the more you realize you don't have it all figured out. There's a lot to learn. And again, just to take it back to ancient Greece, I mean, the very famous quote of Socrates, all I know is that I don't know.
Yeah.
And when he went to the Oracle at Delphi, the Oracle told him, "Oh, you're the wisest man in the world," and he couldn't figure this out because he thought he was an idiot. He thought he was just your average guy,
Yeah.
right? I shouldn't say idiot, but he thought he was just an average guy.
Yeah.
But the difference between him and the great philosophers, sort of the intellectual, financial, cultural elite of his day, was Socrates had the humility to recognize, listen, I don't have all the answers here, and this is why I've got to ask questions.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to offend anyone. I'm not trying to be a jerk here. I'm not trying to get on anyone's nerves, although he did get on a lot of people's nerves. That's why they killed him,
Yeah.
right? I just want to really know, right? I don't want to think. I want to know. So I guess that in a very sort of microcosm, that's been what I've learned most about myself. And it has been great to discover that I am the kind of person because I think sometimes you just get lucky. Some people, you know, when they get to a certain age, they're set in their ways. Like I don't want to be exposed. That mind locks down like it's a safe.
Yeah.
And I guess I've been very fortunate in that I've sort of had that opposite trajectory, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't credit myself for that. I really do think it's just lucky. I mean, you know, my brain operates one way, someone else's brain might operate
Yeah.
a different way. But I'm happy with the way the die has been cast.
So, who's been that inspiration for you in your life? Who's been a hero that's given you this fuel to teach and to inspire a lot of people?
Well, God, I guess there's probably a couple different answers I could give. I think as a child, very early on, my mother was my first hero. And that, again, I grew up in a single parent household, never even, still haven't met my biological father. And we grew up, I don't think it would be unfair to say relatively poor, American poor. You know what I mean? Not like poor like Yemen, right? But just sort of in America, sort of on and off welfare, Section 8 housing. And I think she really showed me the meaning, the value of hard work, uh, and the value of really putting someone else before yourself, of finding meaning in your life by giving someone else's life meaning, because that's really what she did for me. Kind of going into and how this has also influenced my, you know, work as a novelist. I grew up watching He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. And again, I guess that's somewhat a silly answer when some people say, "Oh, my hero is Nelson Mandela," or "My hero is, you know, these various, you know, historical giants that are larger than life." But the thing about He-Man is he sort of taught me a base morality very, very early on,
Yeah.
right? And that there was a responsibility to power, and that you had to use it in the right kinds of ways, and the purpose of it was to help people that couldn't help themselves. And I
Yeah.
think that was incredibly influential. As I sort of got older, just a kind of a real world mentor hero, I would have to say was probably my advisor when I was in my master's program. Just her, and then later her husband, have just been so incredibly influential in my life and her classes. And I tell people all the time, listen, I've been in the military, I've lived overseas, I led troops on other deployments. Other than being a father, the probably one phase of my life that has had the most impact and changed me the most, made me the most I guess, fully formed version of who I am today was my 2 years spent in my master's program.
Yeah.
Even more so than when I went on to do some PhD work, right? Because for whatever reason, that age, that woman, her family, the environment, everything, I was just in a place where I was very open to learning and to knowing and to being malleable. And she absolutely had a huge effect on my life.
So have you been to Rome or Greece? Have you been to these spots, these sacred hallow places?
I have. I've been very fortunate. I went on a couple academic trips. I sort of describe them as tourist trips for teachers and grad students and nerds.
Yeah.
But there's the American School of Classical Studies in Athens. They have a summer program, 6 weeks every year. There's also the American Academy in Rome, similarly, about 6 to 7 weeks every summer. And I was fortunate enough to get partial or full scholarships to both of those schools.
Wow.
Very lucky.
Yeah.
And they were very different experiences, because when we were in Greece, it was almost a reminder a little bit of basic training,
Yeah.
and that every single minute of your day is full, like from 7 to 7, bare minimum 12 hours, you're hustling
Yeah.
from one side to the next. I think we have maybe one day off the whole time, which, again, I wasn't complaining. I mean, I was loving every second of it, right? Rome was a lot more laid back, and I maybe part of the reason for that is maybe that the wine's a little bit better than Italy, and so the people leaving the program want to do have a couple late mornings, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But both were incredible trips, and the great thing about them, especially the Greek trip, was we got to go to a lot of places that, again, your average tourist, your average foreigner coming in from the outside wouldn't go to. I tell people all the time, I saw parts of Greece that the Greeks don't know about.
Wow.
And some of those are just mind boggling. Just give a very quick example.
Yeah.
If you go to the modern city of Sparta, there's really not much there archaeologically.
Yeah.
And what is there is from the Roman period, not the period of classical Sparta, again, the time of the 300 Spartans. And part of that is because, they tell us in the historical sources that in Sparta, they didn't build great monuments. They didn't build walls. The army was their wall. They were the only major city state in Greece that didn't have a defensive wall at the time, right? So they didn't build or leave a lot of art or anything like that or literature. What they did have is this sort of culture that was fine tuned to produce these amazing warriors, right? Later on, the Romans built some stuff, and we do have those ruins. But all that to say, if you go to the modern city today, again, you can walk the sites, and don't get me wrong, there's value to that. But if you're just looking for something that's going to blow your mind, some site, some archaeological finding, you're probably not going to find it in the city. But what you do is you go up into the mountains that are just to the west. And in those mountains, and it's about a 30, 45-minute car ride, you go into a place called Mistra. And was a medieval Byzantine church sanctuary that was built up there. And the way it looks, Joe, if you've ever seen Lord of the Rings,
Yeah.
the
Oh,
city
yeah.
of Tirith, that city that's like built into the mountain, and it goes up and up and up. It looks like that.
Wow.
Again, this is just the ruins thereof, but you can just walk in, you're going in, the mountains are intertwining with the staircases, it's intertwining with the columns, with the porticos, everything. You go in, you see the murals that are on the walls. And of course, these are the ruins of the monastery, but this was a massive monastery in medieval times. I mean, it would have housed, some thousands of people. And just the architecture, everything, it really is its own work of art. A lot of people don't know that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's something that's easy to pass by. But we got to see it. We got to spend quite a bit of time there, and absolutely mind-boggling.
That's amazing, man. So, of all of these adventures that you've been on, everything you've accomplished, master's, PhD, all of the countless the books and everything that you've done, what are you the proudest of? What rises to the top for you?
Well, this may be somewhat a boring answer. I mean, the what I'm proudest of is being a father
Yeah.
and waking up every morning, and even when I maybe didn't do my best the night before, wasn't as patient as I should have been, or maybe what sometimes you can be almost too patient too. You can go both ways with kids, but just rising up the next morning and say, hey, I'm going to try again today, and I'm going to do better today. Again, that's not to I have nothing but amazing things to say again about the places I've seen and the people that I've worked with, people that have invested in my life. Again, nothing but great things to say about my time in the military. But at the end of the day, I feel like so much of that, Joe, was just prep to try to become the best father that I can. At the end of the day, um, the greatest sort of, I guess, title that I'll answer to, like, put on my tombstone. He
Yeah.
was a good father and he was a good husband. That's what's really been the most um, important to me.
Yeah, I dig it. So, Justin, everyone out there has a perception of you. Family, friends, everyone that reads your books, all of your students, everyone that you've worked with, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think I'm someone that has a talent for not giving up. Maybe even when I should on some occasions. I'm a big believer in the this mentality of gradual progress, right? I think so many people, if they want to write a book, and just getting into the literary world, you run into so many people that are like, oh, well, I want to write a book, but I don't have time. Or I started writing a book, but I didn't finish. Or maybe I wrote my book, but the sales weren't very good on the first one, so I decided to scrap the second one. And it's not to say that I don't get tempted myself, right, when these sort of adversities hit, but just whether it's with my writing or again with parenting, kind of the military, academics, like whatever, I just think there's so much value in saying, okay, if I can just wake up tomorrow and if I can even be just 5% better, just 1% better.
Yeah.
I guess that sounds, Joe, like a little bit of a self-help cliche, but I heard it was a Denzel Washington movie. I forget that. I think it was well, I'm forgetting the film, but he has this quote, progress, not perfection. I took that, I jumped on it, I use it in all my classes. Students that I've had 3 years ago will see me like walking on campus. They're like, hey, progress, not perfection, Jermaine. And I'm like, yeah, progress, not perfection. I don't care if you're in the gym. I don't care if it could be healthy, it could be professional, whatever it may be. Just coming to the realization that, hey, if you're trying to learn Mandarin Chinese, right, or something like that, that's a journey you're going to be on for the rest of your life. Why be in this big hurry to get where you're eventually going to go?
Yeah.
Enjoy the journey as much as you can. Enjoy the ride. There's going to be days where the resistance is going to be hard. There's going to be days when the resistance wins.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. Don't judge yourself for those things. Just the next day, say, okay, I'm going to do a little bit better today. And again, it doesn't have to be some kind of a lights out victory. One of the things that I guess I'll just say blessed because I don't give myself credit for how my brain works. It just sort of works that way. I've always been someone that could look at, oh, wow, so I've got a really big tax bill this year. Well, that means that I made more money than I have ever had before. I mean, hey, it's kind of a win, right?
Yeah.
And just reframing things like that, using some of those ancient Stoic keys of reframing, I think, are just so important. And so, how I perceive myself is someone that tries to reframe, doesn't give up, and I'll probably I have ended up, at this point in my life, I've failed as many things as I've succeeded at, but I'm happy with my successes, and even more importantly, I'm happy with my failures, proud of them.
Yeah.
They've helped shape me. So
I love it. What a great answer, man. So, we talked about football before we got on here, and I'm curious if you can get into a time machine, go back in time and see one game, where are you going?
ooh, um, okay, that's really difficult. Okay, so for experience, like just to like I guess to relive the experience,
Yeah.
I gotta say I think probably my best sports experience wasn't actually with football, with the NBA.
Yeah.
It was the year I guess it was the 2016 NBA Finals. It was the Cavs and the Warriors, and that was that 73-9 Warriors team. That was
Yes.
before they had KD, right? But they played the Cavs. They came up to a 3-1 lead very quickly. And I never will forget. I watched the first game. I was in my PhD program in Bloomington, Indiana at the time. I saw the first game. Warriors won it in overtime. I was also in the reserves at the time, Air Force reserves. I got sent over to the UK for a couple of weeks, so I missed the next 3 games. But it was 3-1 when I got back.
Yeah.
But I just remember like meeting up with some of my grad school friends, none of whom were huge basketball fans. And for the record, I'm not either. I will normally watch the finals, right? And watching the Cavs slowly come back. And I can just
Yeah.
tell you, Joe, that there was that moment, I don't know if you remember, where LeBron blocks a shot in game
Yeah.
6, right? And it just, I don't know, the bar that I was in, it sort of came alive. It was as close to church as I've ever seen sports be.
Yeah.
I can only imagine what it would have been like to, be there in the stadium. That would be a fun moment to relive.
Yeah, that
Um,
totally would be.
as far as just like a crazy thing, probably if you remember the Music City Miracle
Yeah.
from back in 1999, the
Uh-huh.
Titans and the Bills.
Yeah.
I mean, just as a play, that just strikes me as just,
Yeah.
you rewind that a million times,
Yeah.
like it doesn't happen like that again, right?
Yeah. Right. No, it's Gonzo for sure. So, hey, Justin, if anyone wants to pick up your books, they want to reach out, learn more about you, anything in your world, where do they go?
Okay, so I publish my books under a pseudonym, Demetrios Lopez. So they can go to demetrioslopez.com.
Yeah.
And again, it's spelled just like it sounds. Just I guess it's a Greek name, Demetrios. But again, you just spell it out. But more importantly, if they just type in Thumos Rising, and Thumos Rising, if you just put that in Amazon, my book will pop right up. It's the Sigma series. So Sigma is a Greek letter. Book one, Thumos Rising. If people are into Dune, which is, of course, people with the movies, there's been a renewed interest in it. I think they're going to love it. If people remember Game of Thrones, maybe Game of Thrones pre-season 7 or 8, I think they're going to love it. It really what it is, it's a combination of the two. It's heavily inspired by Robert E. Howard's Conan the Barbarian character, heavily inspired. I mean, there's really sort of like shades of everything in it. But ultimately, what I tell people is it's honestly kind of a Superman story
Yeah.
because my main character is very much a Superman character within his own fantasy world. It's just that he's playing in a world where there are dragons and sorcerers and also spaceships and magical and all this advanced technology too. So it really is kind of an allegory for modern, I guess a modern application of ancient Stoicism in that you're constantly, again, kind of like we talked earlier with Superman, you have this individual with just godlike powers, and the question that he's constantly faced is, okay, what do I do in this situation? What's the right thing to do? When do I overstep my boundaries? Do I have boundaries? And again, I hope, just like with some of these stories that have been so influential in my life, I hope people are able to find some truth and beauty and utility in mine.
I dig it. Justin, this has been so refreshing. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your story. Best of luck with everything. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much. I appreciate you, Joe.
Cool. Thank you, man.